it frightens people. It frightens people because we are talking about the human mind having gone off somehow. And it strikes too close to home. What if it happens to me? What if it happens to my son? What if it happens to my wife? It's too frightening to think about, and people back off from it. And I think that's why madness has, in general, always been a social problem. And pushing the mad away, out of sight, rather than dealing with madness, has been the preferred approach.
"250 million people in the world are severely mentally ill, according to the latest estimates. No country, east or west, rich or poor, has managed to do justice to those in need of psychiatric help. Concerns about this injustice led us in 1981 to make a film for ITV about Broadmoor, the high-security hospital. The film discovered that many patients were not as dangerous as legend had it, and questioned their treatment.
In Broadmoor, what kind of contact did you have with your psychiatrist?
Virtually none. In the first 2.5 years that he saw me for some total of 42 minutes. No, 42 minutes in 2.5 years.
So I was stripped naked, and one of these nurses went just like this, rubbing his hands together. They said, lock him in. They said, first of all, he said, right, just like this, the treatment. And 3 pairs of size 10 boots started to go into me.
After you've seen a patient kicked and punched unconscious, after you've seen a patient strangled with a wet towel, after you've seen a patient given electroconvulsive therapy without an anaesthetic, you get to a point where the odd punch, you really wouldn't bat an eyelid at.
The Broadmoor film highlighted the dangers of closed institutions. A Japanese lawyer, Etsuro Totsuka, saw the film. The debate it provoked prompted him to investigate how Japan treated its mental patients.
Mentally ill people are regarded as very dangerous, and also it is impossible to cure them. And family members think that it is a shame of them to have a mental patient within their family, and many families think that it is wise for them to get rid of mental patients.
Japan has more mental patients in hospital than any other country. But you don't have to be diagnosed as mad to be locked away for years. Problem children and adults with no history of mental illness can end up in strange institutions like this, Bushoin in Fuji City. It's not a mental hospital, but a Buddhist correction center. The director, Mr. Tadashi Goda, has no medical qualifications. Inmates have to attend 7 religious services a day. Families are willing to pay lavishly to send relatives to Mr. Goda's. At Bushoin, there are no doctors, nurses, or qualified staff.
We have some people here who are mentally ill and whose parents and relatives are gone, and there are others who simply cannot be handled at home or have been rejected by hospitals. People who are into glue sniffing or alcoholics. These are just the same as mentally ill patients, really.
About 10 years ago, I started glue sniffing. Then I started using pep pills. I never really worked, just loafed around doing nothing, wasting my time. That's why I'm here.
I think the most common reason would have to be violence in the home. Mentally ill patients, juvenile delinquents. The families are frightened that they might end up killing someone and bring them here. I don't think there will be anywhere else as strict as this. They have absolutely nothing to do. It's very boring.
What happens if a patient does try to escape and gets out?
We go after them and usually catch them straight away. But there are some who succeed, and they usually go back to their parents' home. So we just go to collect them and bring them back. The cycle just repeats itself.
Mr. Goda puts inmates who misbehave into dark isolation cells. This young inmate was sent to Bushoin by his family because he sniffed glue. He escaped, and his punishment is isolation.
What does he spend his days in there doing?
He sleeps.
How many days has he been in there?
もうすでに何日間入ってますか？今日で2日目です。Second day today.
Okay. What does it make him feel about his parents that they sent him back here?
別にあれだけど、悪いことを心配かけたなと思っています。He feels sorry that he's made them worry so much.
There's been a history of tragedies here. In 1985 there was a fire and a murder, but the authorities have done nothing to close Mr. Goda down.
Here in Japan, there are more than 250,000 mental patients locked up in wards under the compulsory provisions of Mental Health Act. And surprisingly, that in the United Kingdom, there are only 7,000 compulsory detained patients in mental hospitals. So I was surprised the difference.
Japan is almost ashamed of being so ashamed of its mentally ill. Those who don't conform get tidied away. The law allows families to commit relatives to mental hospital if the medical director agrees. Few refuse, since 85% of Japan's hospitals are private, and the more patients, the more profit. Many sane people end up inside. Ignatius Yasui was committed by his family. They disapproved of his career as an artist. In his book, Mr. Yasui described his arrival at Utsunomiya Hospital.
I arrived at Utsunomiya midnight. It was shock. In the room, as I had written in my book, at the corner of a nurse station, there are bloody baseball bat or wooden sword, and very terrible face, much more worse face later than Sicilian mafia in New York City. Look at this carefully. This is not hospital. This is a medical prison in northern Tokyo. It was like a shock with, how do you say, cuff over?
Handcuffs.
Yes, that's right. And by rope.
Mr. Yasui spent over 5 years locked in a ward. One day he asked to see the sun.
During 5 years, 3 months and 10 days, I just directly seeing a sun twice. Then I told, I want to take a sunshine. Behind me, nurse was listening. Okay, come on. You get Nikoyoku sunbathing. Well, handcuff, and there are cage, and like this, and handcuff. Since 8 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock, I just like this.
Outside?
Yes, outside. As you know, the Utsunomiya Hospital, it's a very quite good sunshine. Then there are still the burning. Here is the burning ato. And I told him like this, it's hot. During a week, it's burned and it's a fire burning. No medical care.
In 1984, after complaints in the press, police were called in to dig up the grave of an Utsunomiya patient. The hospital claimed he died of a heart attack.
He was beaten by staff with an iron pipe. The beatings took place in front of other patients, and this shocked many people here. And following that, we found many illegal detentions in that hospital. Also other brutality.
200 detectives came to Utsunomiya and found it had often admitted patients illegally because no doctor had examined them. They also discovered 222 patients had died in 3 years. Dr. Bunoshi Nishikawa, the hospital director, was arrested for using unqualified staff. A nurse was arrested for murder.
The government said that the Utsunomiya case was very isolated, exceptional case. But after Utsunomiya scandal, we found several other scandals. And Otaki Hospital case was one of them. And one mental patient was killed by staff there. And other illegal detentions were found.
Mr. Totsuka also took up Mr. Yamada's case. He was committed to Otaki Hospital for 18 months after a family fight. He kept a diary of the atrocities there.
I felt as if I entered a totally unreal world. It was just like something out of a Kafka novel. It certainly wasn't normal. There was such a strong feeling of authority and control that I could hardly believe it was a hospital. Many so-called patients were being controlled and treated as slaves. A male nurse brought in a patient stark naked. He threw him on the floor and kicked him in the face. He started to bleed. Then the nurse hurled the patient into the bathtub. He grabbed him by the hair, dragged him out again and started kicking him in the back.
And what happened to the patient you saw being beaten in the bathroom?
He died 2 days later.
After the revelations at Utsunomiya, Japanese MPs visited the hospital and saw the isolation cells in which many patients died.
Somebody covered my head of dirty, spoiling smell, garbage smell, how do you say it?
Cloth.
A blanket.
Yeah.
And kick, beat, and I lost myself.
You lost consciousness.
Yes, and I am going to drop to the very dark hole. I remember it. And my ear is making a sound. Well, he kicked my leg. Oh, he is still alive. My eye couldn't open. Then I asked, what day today? It's the third day. Then I asked him, third day and night, or just the third day, 2 nights and the third day? He asked, 3 days, 3 nights and the 4th morning.
Must have been terrible.
Yes, oh, I was alive.
In one of private mental hospitals, a patient was secluded for 30 years or so. And among the staff, nobody knew why he was secluded.
Japanese hospitals often resort to solitary confinement to control and punish patients. After so many scandals, the government has been forced to review its mental health laws. But the clause allowing families to commit their relatives is unlikely to be abolished.
I'm not so optimistic. It might be very difficult for Japan to have a very good law to protect human rights of mental patients, because here private mental hospitals are very powerful, and they do not want to introduce the good system for protecting mental patients' rights.
And the tragedies continue. In March this year, 3 inmates died in a fire at Bushoin, the Buddhist institution in Fuji City. 2 trapped in isolation cells. In the 1950s and 60s, similar tragedies led to reform in the United States. American mental health law changed, making it harder to commit patients. Hospitals released thousands. In New York, inpatients fell from 93,000 in 1960 to 20,000 today.
We literally emptied out the state mental hospitals. Over a 15-year period, we reduced the number of seriously mentally ill people in state hospitals here by 385,000. A large number of these were not provided services when they left the hospital. They relapsed, and they've ended up in shelters and on the streets, very sick. At the same time as we were emptying out the state hospitals, we decided that involuntary hospitalization was a bad thing, and many well-meaning lawyers who happened to not know anything about serious mental illness went and got the laws changed so that in most states of the United States now it's very difficult to hospitalize people involuntarily, so that we're really got a mess in the United States.
On the streets, in the parks, in the stations are thousands of damaged people. Not just ex-patients, but people who need psychiatric help and have no hope of getting it. It's ironic in a city with more psychiatrists, psychologists, psychotherapists, and probably more money than any other city on earth. New York nurtures its neurotics and neglects the sick.
There are now so many homeless, mentally ill people on the streets is that people now are increasingly unhappy with it. Whereas 10 years ago there was only 1 or 2 that he passed on his way to lunch, now there's 7 or 8 or 10 or 12. and we've passed a threshold whereby he now notices that, and the average person in the United States is now starting to ask, why? What happened to our policies? Where did these people come from?
There was a policy for community care in America. Every neighborhood built its own community mental health center.
The community mental health centers did basically the same thing the private psychiatrists were doing. It skimmed the easier patients off the top. They became centers for psychotherapy, and the people with schizophrenia and other serious mental illnesses had nowhere to get services.
I was released from 5 other hospitals. All of the hospitals that released me, the 5, just said goodbye, good luck, and that was it. No attempt at finding me a psychiatrist, no attempt at finding me a place for blood work because I take lithium, no attempt at finding me a place where I could get medication, no attempt at telling me how to pay for my medication and my therapy, nothing, just out the door, and no attempt at getting me aftercare therapy.
Hey, mate, Judas here. What to do with him? How?
What about the guy with the red hat, Mike? Do we get him?
New York City funds a few small projects that try to combat the situation. Project Reach Out has 2 vans that scour the streets with sandwiches and offers of medical help.
Since our major population is supposed to be servicing the mentally ill, one of the hardest things is to decide if someone's mentally ill or if they have a substance abuse problem, because a lot of times they'll look the same. So one of the ways we do that, a lot of times substance abusers want services. They want food, they want clothes, they come running up to the van seeking us out, where the mentally ill do just the opposite. They'll hide, they'll run away, they're very easily frightened. If someone is sort of standoffish and frightened of us, then we figure that they probably are our population. We have psychiatrists who volunteer time with us, and they've been absolutely astounded by what they've seen. There's some mental illnesses which are very rare.
I've been living the street life for, I say, approximately, for a very long time.
For a long time.
Yeah.
And is that something you like doing, or do you have to because you can't get any housing?
Well, it's not particularly that I like them. I like it to a degree, but it's more so like I have to do it.
When we saw Wallace the last time he was hospitalized, he was beating up cars, running around, thinking there was a bomb. He thought there was a bomb in my van and was running out to the van to save me, and was very scary looking. I mean, he's a tall guy and can be very intimidating. He had on pants that were ripped off up to the top of his thighs here. He had his sleeves ripped off his shirt.
TV, and I don't want to get. Look here. Now you, if you gonna tell it right now. Now, can I explain something? Can I explain it? First of all, I don't particularly agree with the people when they say, and I'm not being all nothing against Project Reach Out, but I feel that I have to speak more, for myself.
Do you think you'd be in hospital if you weren't taking the Prolixin?
Do I personally?
Yeah.
Personally?
Yeah.
No.
Can I ask Anne that? Anne?
Yes.
Do you think if it weren't for the Prolixin, you'd be in hospital?
It's a periodic sort of thing. He'll be all right and he'll function okay, and then he'll have a crash. And without the Prolixin, the crash is a scary thing, and it means the police are brought in and psychiatrists and dragging him off to the hospital.
I don't particularly agree with them when they say I have a psychiatric problem for the simple reason, yeah, I may have one. I don't say I don't, but I don't agree with them. See, for the simple reason, how can they say I have a psychiatric problem and they cannot have and they say I need medicine, but they don't have a cure for it, and they can say I have a psychiatric problem.
The reformers who had wanted to give patients their freedom never imagined this. The Franklin Armory in the Bronx. There are 22 of these shelters in New York. A third of those who sleep here are severely mentally ill. Conditions are so stressful that many normal people become acutely depressed, some to the edge of suicide.
City basically has their policy is that you make the shelters as terrible as possible because you don't want people, you know, that in fact there are millions of people waiting out there to come and live in shelters, and that if you made them any better, that people are going to rush to live in these places. We had an incident where a man, you know, and downstairs was in the rafters, climbing up in the rafters, and went up there, took a sheet, tied the sheet around the beam, and stayed up there for an hour threatening to jump off. And we finally, you know, everybody, they through a big effort, we finally talked this man down. And, you know, then this was with, you know, with the staff here and with the HRA staff, and we sent him to the hospital, and they sent him back within 2 or 3 hours. They said, you know, and we said, we called him, we said, why? He said, well, when he got down there, he said he was fine, he was feeling better.
The city sometimes employs security guards who are not well trained, sometimes carry their own weapons and are abusive, and sometimes use violence on the shelter residents.
What kind of weapons do they carry?
Well, of late, what's been in the news media is they've been carrying knives, and they have actually stabbed 2 residents to death during altercations. I think the city is overwhelmed, bewildered, doesn't know where this problem came from, and doesn't know why it's increasing in numbers the way it is.
All members of the subway detail, please report to the superintendent's office in Cleveland. All members of the subway detail. HPD took a day off. Thank you.
You can't possibly warehouse people like this and expect them to behave in some kind of decent fashion. We'd all have a difficult time tolerating it. Most of our clients that we come in contact with would prefer to live on the streets or in the subways.
From the streets, Project Reach Out takes some of the most vulnerable to its center in Upper Manhattan.
The first problem is addressing their physical condition and getting rid of the lice so they can be just themselves more comfortable, and the worker can be more comfortable sitting and interviewing them. So we've had that problem for years, and one of the ways we've been able to overcome the initial problem of trying to get them cleaned up, at least physically, is we've been able to build a shower here on premises. We've never had that before.
Does it make you feel nice to have your hair washed?
Yes, it does. My hair there's a different condition when it is washed and clean, because it has brains in it.
Your hair has brains in it?
Most people, especially geniuses, have brains in their hair.
So I don't know who she is. I don't know from where she is. She's still saying to me that she's Mary Magdalene. She refused to give me her last name. I asked her for her social security, and she said to me that it's 0. I asked her why it's 0. That's impossible. And then she said, well, I am the beginning. Then I have to be 0. Then she don't tell me when she born, the day of birth. Not information, any kind of information that can lead me to know who she is and where she's been. She also denied being hospitalized in any psychiatric institution. But she have conversations with me where she described psychiatric institution very well, and the only way for her to know that is she's been in one.
Because I am the only existing genius specialist in the world. I'm the only...
Do you really believe this, Mary?
I know it to be a fact. I'm the only specialist genius doctor in the world. I'm the examiner, and I have had children, her children, after children.
Eventually, I'm going to know her real name, where she born, and vital information for me to be able to get her entitlements and find a place for her to live here in the city with people, you know.
The problem is New York no longer has low-cost housing for people like Mary. With far fewer hospital beds, only the very sick and very dangerous have any hope of getting treatment. Often they get it too late.
Well, I lived in a hotel and I went around to various firms trying to become a business consultant. And I was sick, and I would go into a firm and into a store and ask them did they want a business consultant, right? And they all refused me. I was sick on the streets for about 13 months, and then I thought I was controlled by ESP, and I killed somebody.
How did you do that?
I killed them in the subway. I pushed them in front of the subway train. And I ruined my life. I thought that they were going to kill me on the subway. So I was questioning him mental telepathy, whether he would sign the ESP chip, whether he believed it was ESP. And he didn't sign it. And I pushed him. He stepped on my toe and I pushed him. I had never been in trouble before. And I was at the end of my ropes. When I'm sick, I talk to television, I talk to birds and animals and insects. They tell me jokes.
If you are a very expensive and well-trained psychiatrist, you are expected to treat people, middle-aged housewives who may be unhappy. If you are a totally incompetent psychiatrist, then you can get a job in a state hospital and treat people who have schizophrenia and true brain diseases. I've argued that the organization of the profession of psychiatry in the United States is probably more psychotic, more crazy in a sense, than the people who have these diseases themselves.
Despite all the criticisms, New York plans to reduce its hospital beds even further and build more large shelters. If the two richest countries in the world have got it so wrong in such different ways, what hope is there for the third world?
In the country today, if you assess in general, only about 10% of the mentally ill are getting any help at all. And even this help is mostly in the urban areas, cities or bigger towns. There is no help of any kind in the village. So most of them, even today, majority of them go to witchcraft, priests, or go to temples, or they accept and keep quiet.
India, with a population of 750 million, finds it hard to provide any health services. The government spends 80 pence per person a year on all health care. Traditionally, healers have treated the mentally ill at temples, exorcising the demons and evil spirits that many Indians believe cause madness.
Some patients come in a peculiar way. They have got, some rings on their legs, which is welded together with a bar of iron, and then another long iron rod is attached to it. With that, two rings on the hands are welded on.
Mrs. Davis has the iron bars and manacles smashed off at the local cycle shop. She runs one of the few private mental hospitals in India. She tries to keep her prices within reach of poorer people, but the £7 a week fees are still 3 times the average rural wage.
Most of the patients, when they come here, they are in a very dehydrated condition. They refuse to take food, they don't drink water, and they don't have proper sleep, and they are in a miserable condition. They are brought here. There are patients who haven't eaten or taken water for at least 3 weeks. They had 1 or 2 patients, who had good beatings at home and tied up for days together in the rooms and Some of the parents say that a little bit of hardship will be good for them if they are put in a mental hospital. But here the patients think that they feel happy here. It is like a picnic for them.
The Davis Institute employs 2 part-time doctors and 2 nurses for 300 patients.
I don't get any grant from government. I am self-supporting. So I have to manage everything with this £1 per day. They'll get their food, medicine. The staff and doctors, everything had to be paid out of this money.
Mrs. Davis has great faith in electroconvulsive therapy. ECT is controversial. In the West, recommended practice is to give it with an anesthetic and a muscle relaxant. Otherwise, convulsions may dislocate joints. Usually, Mrs. Davis uses neither and relies on other patients to help carry and restrain.
So
how many ECTs would you do in a day?
Sometimes 20, sometimes 60. It all depends upon the number of patients we are having and how bad the patients are. You cannot say every day we are doing it. But we usually don't give more than 3 treatments. We just like to tide over the important emergency period. And if you don't give ECT, they may even die.
Patients usually recover quite well after about 20 minutes. But sometimes ECT can have serious long-term side effects. Mrs. Davis can only treat the fairly affluent. But here, half a mile away, is the Bihar State Mental Hospital for the very poor. In 1984, after a staff strike here, patients were left to starve inside. 500 escaped. 18 bodies were found in the hospital.
I mean, I'm aware of the publicity generated, and I'm aware of the fairly disastrous ongoings during a strike of staff there. But outside of that particular strike situation, I wouldn't think the situation was particularly bad. I mean, the budget is very limited. They had only a few rupees per patient day feeding, for example. So it was a bit at the limit of what should be acceptable. But it wasn't particularly bad, I shouldn't think.
Have you seen worse in India?
Well, perhaps, yes.
India's few mental hospitals will never be able to cope. The challenge now is to get care into the villages, to reach the unreached. Every month, the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, NIMHANS, sends a team of 12 professionals to remote villages like Madur. They see 300 patients in 5 hours, schizophrenics, epileptics, and those who may need brain surgery. Patients travel up to 150 miles to reach the clinic.
He keeps on running away from home. He wets and soils his clothes, and he picks up food from rubbish. People say, why don't you take him somewhere to get treatment?
How difficult was it for you to get here today?
It was very difficult. It took some time to get the money to come, but I did, and we came by motor rickshaw.
There are some conditions in India that haven't been seen in the West for 100 years. This young woman's hysterical trance is her way of expressing deep distress.
I started this with the help of local voluntary organizations like Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, Red Cross, Mahila Mandals, Taluk boards, developmental boards. So I involved them. I suggested NIMHANS will provide only professional help. The rest of it, organization of the clinic, providing drugs, maintaining of the records, should be from the local area.
The work is impressive, but well-organized schemes like this one, based in Bangalore, serve only 1% of the population. With funding from the World Health Organization, NIMHANS also works with local primary healthcare teams. Today they're off to Banawadi, where they've identified a number of mentally ill people who've never had any care. For 25 years, Mrs. Shivarma suffered severe schizophrenia.
I'm much better now. She was in a dreadful state. We just couldn't control her. She'd never stop talking. She hit the children. She was impossible to live with. We had to lock her in a room, sometimes for 24 hours. She was always abusive. I had no idea she could be treated in hospital. She'd scratch the children so badly, sometimes they'd bleed.
Mrs. Shivarma's condition is now well controlled with fortnightly injections from her local doctor.
When we treat patients in the community, it's well shown again and again that we use the drugs in lesser quantities and for lesser duration as compared to in a hospital. In the community, drugs only form a very small part of the whole therapy. For example, when they go to the fields and work, or when they go to attend festivals and other things, they form as part of therapy. What we try to do it in a daycare center or in occupation therapy gets done in an automatic manner because that is part of life. So what we are doing is making it possible for people to pick up their life so that the society will accept them rather than drugging them to be quiet in the community.
In villages like this, the mentally ill can improve. Modern treatment and an ancient way of life are in balance. But that balance is fragile. As a country like Egypt becomes more industrialized, the delicate balance that supports Mrs. Shivarma in her village is harder to sustain. In Cairo, with 14 million inhabitants, the traditional family structure is breaking down, which makes it difficult to cope with mentally ill relatives.
To some extent, you can see that they are tolerant in the rural areas. But with the increased modernization, you find that they want to put them in the mental hospitals, because of the change and of the quick change in the social life of the families.
Dr. Al-Azaim owns one of Cairo's many private hospitals. Patients come from all over the Arab world to be treated in Egypt. Dr. Al-Azaim's wife and all their 7 sons and daughters work at his hospital, and they're proud of their modern Western techniques.
I am applying here all the new approaches, even the computerized EEG, the very new apparatuses I am trying really to catch with the development in that field.
The patient is now ready for the ECT. Very well.
Here, ECT is given with an anesthetic and a muscle relaxant. It's no accident that Dr. Al-Azaim should be president of the World Federation of Mental Health, because the medical model he uses of drugs, ECT and some occupational therapy is typical of what patients get the world over. But is this treatment or a way of killing time? Shutting the severely mentally ill away and giving them drugs is still the main approach in most of the world. But their fate doesn't have to be so bleak. At Mokatam Hospital in Cairo, the day involves intensive activity.
Medicine historically is getting back the patient to be active, productive, and creative. This is the actual original historical medical model. But now doctors are brainwashed, let us say, by the monopoly and overwhelming invasion by the pharmaceutical agents and the trade of drugs. But I am against this altogether. We take a very small group, and the ratio is more or less 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 therapists to patient. Some of our visitors ask, who are the doctors and who are the patients? Just recently, I imagine that we have to calculate our success in therapy by the activity rather than the tranquility. And we do not focus on symptoms, but we focus on how we feel the 24 hours outdoors. And this needs some sort of new orientation against this tranquilization policy and shutting in and visualizing the mental illness as if some chemistry is up, some chemistry is down, that's all.
Well, as you know, in schizophrenia, well, the patient rather prefer to withdraw from reality, withdraw from society, and lay peacefully in his autistic world. And so sometimes I have to exert pressure upon patients and be with them in order that they would tolerate again being with other people and tolerate stresses imposed to them by society.
At Mokatam, they press them to participate, they press them to work. This kind of tough preparation for the pressures of the outside world is uncommon.
I think there's a big change in this hospital from the other one. I've been twice in another one. I felt that I'm in a hotel, just treatment, tablets, nothing more. But here there is a lot of things to do. They try to take the bad things from ours to put it in front of us to help us to see it.
Today, after the volleyball and the talking and that,
Yeah.
how do you feel today?
Fresh.
Fresh.
Yeah.
You've been here 50 days. Have
Yeah.
you changed in that 50 days?
Yeah, a big change.
It's also been a big change for Walter Reed in New York. He's been in and out of hospital for 25 years and often slept rough, until he was taken up by community access. If patients are to be cared for in the community, projects like this are vital. Community access costs no more than hospital care and provides Walter with a flat, regular support and advice on how to get all his social security benefits.
Oh, I receive Social Security and SSI, the two checks, one for the left hand and one for the right hand, and then I pay my rent, and then I go out with girls and buy whatever I think maybe that I need. I guess that's about all I know to say about that.
How do you spend your days? I mean, do you look after the apartment yourself?
No, I have a house lady to help to clean up the place. I wouldn't say I'm lucky or whatever that is, but I reckon maybe it's appreciable. Yeah, I appreciate it.
You appreciate it?
Yeah, I appreciate it, yeah. Because when I didn't have community access, I had to go back to the hospital when I didn't have no shelter. And when you by yourself and ain't got nobody to look out for you, it's quite difficult to find places.
All institutions create their own problems. Releasing patients into the community creates new problems. This became clear when New York cut many hospital beds without a proper strategy for community care. In the UK, we are losing hospital beds too, and our community care is erratic. We should be aware that we may be creating new problems as bad as any that went before.
Dove sta? Che fare